A historic meeting took place in Washington, D.C. this weekend as leaders from over 20 different nations came together to try and solve the global financial crisis. This signals the first time that such a large number of powerful politicians sat down at the same table to solve a global crisis, and the reactions around the world were mixed.
There is a fair degree of skepticism that world leaders can use political mechanisms and the articulation of political concepts to affect economic change. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the central banks, such as the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Chinese Central Bank, the sovereign wealth funds, and the actual holders of liquidity around the world to find ways to stabilize the economic downturn and to restart economic growth on an international level.
The historic G20 Summit opened with a working dinner here at the White House on Friday and continued with intensive talks on Saturday aimed at overhauling the world's financial systems. Although there were many varying viewpoints and a mix of industrialized and emerging economies represented, many of the leaders argued that increased regulation and monitoring of the international financial system was needed.
The recommendations that are agreed to is that a regime is needed for regulating the trading of derivatives and securities that are leveraged, for mechanisms in which such trades are carried out, for how wealth will be distributed to the developing world, and how new reforms of the World Bank and the IMF will be likely addressed or carried out. Certainly the beginning of that process was initiated in Washington.
Stock markets around the world have been on a roller coaster ride, one in which many analysts are predicting could lead to a deep global recession or even depression.
If we're into a deep recession, possibly even a depression in many of these countries, certainly Western Europe, the United States, Canada, Australia, you could end up having a severe downturn in consumer spending, which means all of these major companies, I mean, some of them we've seen recently, Best Buy, a lot of other companies that are declaring bankruptcy.
President Bush maintained that this summit was just the beginning and that the foreign ministers of the respective countries represented would be working on a final proposal to be announced on March 31st, 2009.
I don't know what you want to call this one, but whatever name comes for this meeting, it took 3 weeks to prepare. And so it makes sense to come out of here with a firm action plan, which we have. It also makes sense to say to people that there is more work to be done and there will be further meetings. Sending a clear signal that a meeting is not going to solve the world's problems. A meeting will help begin a process so that we can say over time that we will have a regulatory structure in place that will make this less likely to happen in the future.
Reporting for Economic Horizons, this is Shruti Mather in Washington, D.C., USA.